At my son's promotion party, I noticed my seat was next to the catering staff, not near the stage, not at the executive tables draped in white linen and crystal, but beside a rolling cart stacked with dessert plates and folded napkins. I smiled and thanked the young waiter who pulled out my chair. If you've ever been quietly moved out of your own place in someone else's celebration, then stay with me. Because what happened that night did not end at that table. My name is Eleanor Whitmore. I'm 70 years old, a widow for 3, and until that evening, I believed I still knew where I stood in my son's life. The party was held at a rooftop venue overlooking downtown Chicago. Floor-to-ceiling glass, a string quartet near the bar, champagne flowing like it had its own budget line. My son, Daniel, had just been promoted to senior vice president at a national investment firm. The kind of title that comes with a corner office and a parking spot with your name engraved in brass. I wore navy silk. Conservative. Elegant. The kind of dress you wear when you don't want to compete with anyone. You just want to belong. A hostess with a tight smile checked her tablet. Whitmore, she repeated. Yes, right this way. She walked past the central tables. Past the one marked executive leadership. Past the one where I saw Daniel laughing, one hand resting proudly at the small of his wife's back. Claire, my daughter-in-law. She looked radiant in emerald green, her hair swept up, diamond studs catching the light every time she turned her head. The hostess stopped near the back. Not even the back. The side. Near a service station half hidden behind a decorative partition. This is you. The name card read, Mrs. E. Whitmore, no mother of the honoree. No family designation. Just my name. Small print. At the table sat 2 catering supervisors reviewing schedules and a bartender on break scrolling through his phone. One of them looked up quickly. Oh, I think this is for staff overflow. The hostess hesitated, then gave me the same tight smile. No, this is correct. Correct. I sat down. The chair wobbled slightly on the tile. I steadied it with my hand and folded my purse carefully on my lap. From where I was seated, I could see Daniel clearly. He was shaking hands, accepting congratulations, nodding with that confident tilt of his chin he'd practiced since business school. I remembered when he used to tilt his head like that while asking me for $20 for gas. I told myself it was a mistake. Seating charts get complicated. Events like this are chaos behind the scenes. Claire must be overwhelmed. She planned the whole thing herself. She'd mentioned that at least 4 times over the phone. I'm handling everything, Eleanor. These corporate optics matter. Corporate optics. I glanced at the nearest centerpiece at my table. It was smaller than the others. 3 carnations in a short vase instead of the tall arrangements of white roses I saw at the center tables. One of the catering supervisors leaned toward me. Ma'am, are you at the venue? No, I said gently. I'm Daniel's mother. He blinked. Oh, he didn't know where to put his eyes after that. Neither did I. A burst of applause erupted near the stage. Daniel had taken the microphone. Claire stood beside him, radiant, camera ready. She adjusted his tie before he spoke. I wouldn't be here without my incredible wife, he began. More applause. I folded my hands together. He spoke about long nights, strategic pivots, mentorship, market volatility, vision. He did not mention the year after college when he moved back into my house because his startup failed. He did not mention the second mortgage I took out to help him rebuild. He did not mention the 4 years I watched their daughter, Lily, every weekday so Claire could finish her MBA without paying for childcare. Of course he didn't. That wasn't the story that fit the lighting tonight. A server approached with a tray of sparkling water. For guests only, she whispered automatically, then flushed when she noticed my wristband. Apparently, I had the same color as the staff. I held up my glass without correcting her. Across the room, Claire's eyes briefly scanned the tables. They paused, just for a second, when they reached mine. She saw me. She looked away. Not startled. Not confused. Not apologetic. Just aware. That was the moment the truth settled in. This wasn't an oversight. This was placement. Strategic. Intentional. Quiet. I watched as one of Daniel's colleagues leaned toward Claire and asked something. Claire laughed softly, covering her mouth in that polished way. She had. The colleague glanced around the room. His eyes passed over me without recognition. I had become background, a neutral element in the decor. The bartender at my table checked his watch. Break's almost over. The catering supervisor shuffled his papers. We'll need to reset table 6 before dessert. Table 6. I looked toward the large round table closest to the stage. That was table 1. I counted silently. 2, 3, 4, 6 was mine. I felt something tighten in my chest, not anger. Clarity. Because humiliation burns hot at first. But clarity is cold. And cold lasts longer. Daniel finished his speech to thunderous applause. Claire kissed his cheek. Photographers circled them like bees around something sweet. A staff member approached my table. Family members are invited up for photos. The catering supervisor stood automatically, assuming the invitation wasn't for him. The staff member glanced at me, checked her clipboard. Oh, she said. Immediate family only. Immediate. I nodded. That's fine. I remained seated. From my chair beside the dessert cart, I watched strangers wrap their arms around my son for the cameras. I noticed something else, too. On the program printed at each table, under special thanks, there was a section to Claire Whitmore for her flawless coordination of tonight's event. No other names. Not even Daniel's late father. Not even the small family foundation that had quietly invested in Daniel's first firm. The one still partially funded by a trust in my name. I ran my thumb slowly over the edge of the paper. Flawless coordination. Yes, it was flawless. Even the exclusion had been polished. As the string quartet shifted into something livelier, and dessert plates were carried past me, I made a decision. Not dramatic, not visible, but firm. I would not confront them tonight. I would not create a scene. I would finish my sparkling water. I would congratulate my son. I would hug my granddaughter. And tomorrow morning, I would call my attorney. Because they had moved my chair. And when someone moves your chair on purpose, you don't argue about the furniture. You reconsider the house. That night, at my son's promotion party, I was seated with the staff. I smiled. But something else quietly stood up inside me. When the applause finally faded and the photographer packed up his equipment, I stayed exactly where I was. No one came to walk me back to the main tables. No one said, "Mom, why are you sitting here?" The staff began clearing plates from the executive section first. Silverware clinked. Laughter rose again near the bar. The kind of laughter that comes when people feel important. I smoothed the fabric of my dress over my knees and watched my son from across the room. Daniel looked taller that night. Promotion does that to a man. It stretches him, not just in posture, but in memory. Certain details get left behind when you rise too fast. Claire stood beside him, one hand resting lightly on his arm as if she were guiding him through the evening like a museum exhibit. She was efficient, strategic, composed, and very aware of optics. A young server approached my table again, this time with a tray of miniature cheesecakes. She hesitated before offering one to me. "Oh, I'm sorry. Are you?" "I'm a guest," I said gently. Her shoulders relaxed. "Of course. I'm sorry, ma'am." I took one cheesecake. It tasted fine, sweet, balanced, carefully plated, just like the event. Across the room, I saw Lily, my granddaughter, weaving between adults in her little blue dress. She spotted me and waved enthusiastically. For a brief second, I saw hesitation in Claire's posture. Then Claire bent down and whispered something to Lily. Lily's wave faltered. She turned and followed her mother toward the stage area instead. That small movement, that redirect, told me more than the seating chart ever could. I was being managed. Not excluded in anger. Not forgotten in chaos. Managed. The quartet took a break, and soft jazz filtered through the speakers. A few executives moved toward my section to use the restrooms down the hallway behind me. One of them slowed as he passed. "Excuse me," he said politely. "Are you at the venue?" "No," I replied. "I'm Daniel Whitmore's mother." His expression shifted instantly. Recognition. Surprise. Then something like discomfort. "Oh, I didn't realize." Of course he didn't. Why would he? I wasn't positioned to be recognized. He cleared his throat. "Congratulations. He's done very well." "Yes," I said. "He has." And I meant it. That was the complicated part. I wasn't jealous of his success. I had prayed for it, worked for it, helped finance it. But somewhere along the way, success had become something that required distance from its origins. And I was part of those origins. A memory surfaced, not dramatic, just quiet. Daniel at 24, sitting at my kitchen table. Papers spread out. Bank statements. Credit card debt. A rejection letter from a lender. "Mom," he had said, not meeting my eyes. "If I can just stabilize for 6 months." I had walked into my bedroom, opened the cedar chest at the foot of my bed, and taken out the envelope that held my emergency savings. $48,000. Almost all of it. I told him it was an investment, not a gift. He promised he would make me proud. And he had. But pride looks different when you're seated near the dessert cart. A sudden ripple of laughter came from the center of the room. Claire had taken the microphone now. I just want to say, she began smoothly, none of this would be possible without the sacrifices we've made as a couple. As a couple. The words were precise. Sacrifices. I wondered which one she meant. The late nights? The networking dinners? The relocation to Chicago? Or the years I drove across town every morning at 7 a.m. to watch Lily so they wouldn't have to pay $1,800 a month for childcare. I didn't expect public praise, but I did notice absence. Absence is loud when you're listening for it. The catering supervisor at my table stood. We've got to reset this section. I rose with him automatically, thinking I was in the way. Oh no, ma'am, he said quickly. You can stay. We'll work around you. Work around me. That phrase settled in my chest. For the rest of the evening, that's exactly what they did. They worked around me. Daniel eventually made his way over, champagne in hand. Mom, he said brightly. There you are. There you are. As if I had wandered off. He leaned down and kissed my cheek. Isn't this incredible? It is, I said. He glanced briefly at the table, at the staff badges, at the smaller centerpiece. His eyes paused, just for a second. A flicker. He knew. Not fully, but enough. You're comfortable, right? He asked. The question was careful. Not curious. Careful. I'm fine, I answered. Claire approached a moment later, smile polished. Eleanor, she said warmly. I hope the seating isn't too crowded. We had to prioritize certain guests for visibility. Visibility. I held her gaze. I understand, I said. And I did. More than she realized. Because visibility is currency in corporate spaces. And someone had decided I cost too much of it. Daniel squeezed my shoulder. We'll talk later, okay? I've got to check on a few people. Of course he did. He walked away before I could respond. Claire followed, already scanning the room for the next handshake. I sat back down slowly. The cheesecake plate was empty now. Only crumbs remained. The music picked up again. Glasses clinked. Deals were hinted at. Future promotions imagined. And for the first time that night, I stopped asking whether this had been intentional. Instead, I began asking a different question. If I no longer fit the image of their success, then why was my money still woven into it? I folded my napkin carefully and placed it on the table. Tomorrow morning, I wouldn't just be calling my attorney. I would be reviewing every agreement Daniel had ever signed with me. Because humiliation can make you shrink. Or it can make you take inventory. And I have always been very good with inventory. I didn't leave right away. That surprised me. There was a time in my life when I would have quietly gathered my purse, slipped out the side door, and told myself it didn't matter. That I was being sensitive. That young people do things differently. But 70 years teaches you something. Patterns repeat. And when something feels deliberate, it usually is. The party began to thin out around 10:30 p.m. The executives drifted toward the elevators in small, satisfied clusters. The string quartet packed their instruments. The lights dimmed slightly, softer now, less performance, more cleanup. I stood slowly and made my way toward the main floor. No one stopped me. No one redirected me. Interesting how easy it was to move when the cameras were gone. Daniel was near the bar, laughing with two senior partners. Claire stood beside him, one hand lightly touching his arm again. Always guiding, always positioning. I waited until the partners stepped away. Daniel, I said. He turned, slightly startled, like he hadn't expected to see me so close. Mom. Hey, we were just wrapping up. I can see that. Claire smiled. Controlled. Did you enjoy yourself? It was a careful question. I answered it. Carefully. It was beautifully organized. Claire's chin lifted just slightly. Approval registered. Daniel shifted his weight. Sorry we didn't get more time to talk. It's been crazy. I'm sure it has. There was a pause. Not awkward. Just unfinished. I looked at my son, really looked at him. The tailored suit. The expensive watch. The confidence. He looked successful. But there was something else behind his eyes tonight. Not guilt. Not exactly. More like calculation. I'm proud of you, I said finally. And I meant that too. His shoulders relaxed. Thanks, Mom. That means a lot. Claire glanced at her phone. We should head out soon. Early brunch tomorrow with the regional team. Always another event. Always another room where placement matters. Daniel leaned down and hugged me. Quick. Light. Careful not to wrinkle the suit. We'll get together next week, he said. Maybe dinner? Of course. Claire kissed the air near my cheek. Drive safe, Eleanor. Not Mom. Not even Mrs. Whitmore. Eleanor. I walked to the elevator alone. In the mirrored walls, I caught my reflection, navy silk, pearl earrings, posture straight. I didn't look out of place. I looked contained. In the parking garage, the night air felt colder than it had earlier. Chicago wind has a way of reminding you that height comes with exposure. I sat in my car for a moment before turning the engine on. And that's when I replayed something Claire had said earlier in the evening. We had to prioritize certain guests for visibility. Prioritize. Visibility. Words chosen in advance. Not spontaneous. Planned. I drove home slowly, staying in the right lane, letting the city lights blur past. When I reached my townhouse in Evanston, I didn't go straight inside. Instead, I opened my glove compartment and pulled out the small folder I always keep there. Inside were copies. Copies of the original loan agreement Daniel had signed 12 years ago. Copies of the addendum we created 3 years later when his firm restructured. Back then, his accountant had suggested formalizing everything. Just to keep it clean, he'd said. Claire had been very supportive of that idea. Clarity protects everyone, she had told me. She was right. Clarity does protect everyone. I carried the folder inside and set it on my kitchen table. The house was quiet. Too quiet. No small shoes by the door anymore. No school backpacks. On the counter, Lily was older now, 10, busy with piano lessons and private tutoring. Less time at Grandma's. I poured myself a glass of water and sat down. For the first time that night, I allowed the question to form clearly. Was tonight about embarrassment? Or was it preparation? Because seating someone at the staff table does two things. It lowers them publicly, and it signals privately that their position has changed. I thought about the assisted living brochures Claire had casually mentioned last Christmas. Oh, they're building such lovely communities now, she had said while refilling my coffee. Amenities. Security. Built-in social life. I had smiled then too. I opened the folder. The original investment amount was clearly stated. $48,000. Converted into equity when Daniel's company stabilized. Not a gift. Not informal help. Equity. And equity comes with rights. I turned to the latest update statements. My share had grown significantly over the years. Modestly compared to Daniel's holdings, but not insignificantly. Enough to matter. Enough to influence. Enough to make someone uncomfortable if they were trying to present a simplified narrative of self-made success. I leaned back in my chair. This wasn't about hurt feelings anymore. It was about alignment. If my presence didn't fit the image, would my ownership fit it any better? The next morning, I didn't call Daniel. I called my attorney. Good morning, Thomas, I said calmly. I'd like to review my equity position in Whitmore Capital, and I'd like to understand my options. There was a brief pause on the other end. Of course, he said. Is something wrong? No, I replied. Something is simply becoming clear. And clarity, I've learned, is far more useful than confrontation. By noon, I had an appointment scheduled for Tuesday. By evening, Daniel texted. Had a great night. So glad you came. I looked at the message for a long moment before responding. I'm glad too. And that was true, because if I hadn't attended, I might never have seen exactly where they intended to seat me. And sometimes, knowing your assigned place is the first step toward choosing a different one. Tuesday morning arrived colder than expected. Not the weather. The clarity. I dressed simply, gray wool coat, low heels, leather folder tucked under my arm. No silk this time. No pearls. When you're going to review ownership documents, you don't need to look ornamental. Thomas's office was on the 12th floor of a brick building downtown. I've known him for 22 years. He handled my late husband's estate. He drafted the trust that still pays the property taxes on my townhouse in Evanston. He also witnessed Daniel's signature the day we converted that loan into equity. Thomas greeted me with a concerned smile. You sounded serious on the phone. I am, I said. We sat across from each other at a long mahogany table. He opened the folder I'd brought, though he already had digital copies on file. I'd like to understand, I began calmly, exactly how much control I have over my shares. He adjusted his glasses. You hold 12% of Whitmore Capital. Non-dilutable under the original agreement unless you consent in writing. 12%. That might not sound like much to some people, but in a privately structured firm, 12% is not decorative. It's leverage. And if I were to liquidate? I asked. Thomas paused. You could trigger a buyback clause. The company would have 90 days to purchase your shares at fair market value. If they cannot, you'd have the right to offer them externally, though that would create pressure. Pressure. A polite word. I nodded slowly. Has Daniel approached you about restructuring? Thomas asked carefully. No, not yet. Thomas studied me for a moment. Is this about family dynamics? I smiled slightly. It's about seating arrangements. He didn't ask further. Good attorneys don't need the full story. They just need the direction. We spent the next hour reviewing documents. Numbers. Clauses. Conditions. Cold language. Clean edges. Very different from champagne and string quartets. By the time I left his office, I understood something clearly. I had options. And options restore posture. That afternoon, I stopped by the bank. Not to withdraw anything dramatic. Just to review account access. 3 years ago, when Daniel's firm expanded, Claire had suggested simplifying certain financial connections. Just in case of emergency, she had said sweetly. It's easier if we can help manage things. At the time, I'd allowed Daniel limited viewing access to one of my secondary accounts, the one tied to dividend distributions. Not control, just visibility. The banker confirmed it. Your son can see deposits, Mrs. Whitmore, but he cannot move funds. Good. Visibility without control. How appropriate. On my drive home, I thought. Again about that night at the rooftop venue. About the smaller centerpiece. About Lily being redirected. About Claire's word choice. Visibility. Prioritize. Manage. I've raised children. I've run a household. I've navigated hospital corridors at 2 a.m. and negotiated with contractors who thought a widow wouldn't understand plumbing invoices. I recognize management when I see it. That evening, Daniel called. Not texted. Called. Hey, Mom, he said. His voice was lighter than usual. Controlled. Do you have a minute? I do. There was a slight hesitation. I just wanted to check in. Make sure you weren't uncomfortable the other night. There it was. Not apology. Assessment. I was fine, I said evenly. Claire mentioned you might have felt a little out of place. The seating was complicated. A lot of senior partners needed to be near the stage. I let the silence stretch just long enough. I understand how hierarchy works, Daniel. Another pause. Of course you do, he replied quickly. That's not what I meant. I know. And I did. He wasn't cruel. He was adapting. There's a difference. Mom, he continued carefully. We've been talking about long-term planning lately. For everyone. You know, stability. Future transitions. Future transitions. It was subtle. Very subtle. But the direction was clear. And what kind of transitions are you imagining? I asked. Well, he said, lowering his voice slightly. Claire found a few excellent communities near us. Just a tour. No pressure. Just options. Options. I almost smiled. I've always appreciated options, I replied. Good, he said quickly. We just want what's best for you. Of course they did. After we hung up, I sat at my kitchen table again. The same one where Daniel once spread out unpaid bills and asked for help. The same table where I signed equity papers to formalize my investment. The same table where Lily used to do her math homework while I made grilled cheese sandwiches. I opened my laptop. Not to look at assisted living communities. To review the valuation estimates Thomas had emailed me. Whitmore Capital had grown substantially. If I triggered a buyback, it would require significant liquidity. Liquidity they might not have readily available without adjusting other commitments. Commitments like expansion plans, or executive bonuses, or image-building events at rooftop venues. I closed the laptop gently. This wasn't revenge. It was recalibration. If they were planning my transition out of visibility, then I needed to evaluate whether I would remain woven into their foundation. Because here is something I've learned at 70. When people begin to manage your place in the room, you must review your place in the structure. And structures are built on ownership. Not applause. Not seating charts. Ownership. Tuesday had given me clarity. And clarity, once gained, does not return quietly to ignorance. It waits. And I have always been patient. The next invitation came 3 days later. Sunday brunch. Claire's idea. Just family. Daniel had texted. Low-key. Low-key is an interesting phrase. It usually means something has already been discussed before you arrive. Their house in Wilmette looked immaculate, as always. Fresh hydrangeas near the entryway. Hardwood floors polished. The faint scent of lemon cleaner, and something baking, probably blueberry muffins. Claire opened the door before I rang the bell. Eleanor, she said warmly. Come in. She hugged me lightly, careful, measured. Daniel was in the kitchen, pouring coffee into 3 identical white mugs. Lily sat at the island doing homework, pencil moving quickly across a worksheet. Grandma, she said brightly. That brightness was real. Children haven't learned placement yet. I kissed the top of her head. What are we working on? Fractions. Ah, I said. The art of dividing things fairly. Claire's smile tightened for half a second. We sat at the dining table, the good one, not the kitchen nook. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows. Everything looked composed. Daniel cleared his throat. So, he began casually, we've been thinking about the future. The future again. Claire folded her hands neatly. We just want to make sure everyone is protected. Structured. No confusion down the road. I sipped my coffee. Confusion about what? I asked gently. Daniel hesitated. Well, your assets. The townhouse. The investment in the firm. It might be wise to consolidate things. Consolidate. That word had weight. Claire leaned forward slightly. We spoke with a financial planner. There are tax efficiencies if certain holdings are transferred earlier rather than later. Transferred. Earlier. I set my mug down carefully on its saucer. And to whom would these holdings be transferred? I asked. Daniel looked uncomfortable now. Not defensive. Just uneasy. To a family trust, he said. Managed jointly. It would simplify everything. Managed jointly. By whom? Claire answered before I could ask. Daniel and I, of course. With advisory. Oversight. Of course. I let the silence sit between us. Not heavy. Just clear. Lily looked up from her homework. Mom, can Grandma come to my piano recital next month? Of course she can. Claire replied quickly, her voice bright again. Grandma will always be included. Always. Included. Interesting choice of word. Daniel reached across the table and touched my hand. Mom, this isn't about control. It's about planning. We don't want you worrying about paperwork or market fluctuations at your age. At my age. I withdrew my hand gently and folded it in my lap. I've been managing market fluctuations longer than you've been shaving, I said calmly. Daniel exhaled, half laugh, half tension. I know. You're sharper than all of us. Claire's eyes met mine. Polite. Assessing. We just think, she said carefully, that as life evolves, roles shift. There it was. Roles shift. I nodded slowly. They do, I agreed. And sometimes, she continued, it's easier when older generations allow the next one to step fully into leadership. Leadership. I thought about the rooftop venue, the smaller centerpiece, the staff wristband, the phrase prioritize for visibility. I understood now. This wasn't about assisted living brochures alone. It wasn't even about convenience. It was about narrative control. If I transferred my shares into a jointly managed trust, I would no longer hold direct leverage. I would become symbolic, honored, referenced, managed, but not positioned. Daniel leaned back in his chair. We can have Thomas draft something preliminary, just to explore. I held his gaze. Thomas works for me, I said gently. Silence. Not explosive, but precise. Claire's posture straightened slightly. Of course. We'd coordinate. Coordinate. I reached for my purse and removed a slim envelope. Not dramatic. Just deliberate. I met with Thomas this week, I said. Daniel blinked. You did? Yes. Claire didn't speak. I wanted clarity, I continued. On my equity position. Daniel's expression changed. Subtle. Alert. What about it? He asked carefully. I wanted to understand my options. The room felt different now. Not hostile, but recalibrating. Claire's voice was smooth. Options for what, exactly? For alignment, I replied. Daniel leaned forward. Mom, you're not thinking of selling, are you? There it was. Not concern for my comfort. Concern for liquidity. I'm thinking, I said evenly, about what makes sense long term. Lily slid off her chair. I'm done with homework, she announced, sensing the shift without understanding it. Claire stood quickly. Why don't you practice piano for a bit? Lily disappeared down the hallway. Daniel lowered his voice. Mom, if you triggered a buyback, it would complicate things. Complicate? Yes, it would, I agreed. Claire finally dropped the polished warmth. Is this about the party? She asked. There was no apology in her tone, just calculation. I looked at her. It's about placement, I said quietly. Neither of them spoke, because they understood. When someone moves your seat in public, they are testing how firmly you believe you belong. And when they start discussing transferring your holdings, They are testing whether you still hold power. I stood slowly. I haven't made any decisions, I said calmly. I simply believe roles should shift with clarity, not assumption. Daniel rose too. We're on the same team. I paused at the doorway. Teams require respect, I replied. Then I left. Driving home, I didn't feel angry. I felt steady. They had begun planning my transition. What they hadn't calculated was that I had already begun reviewing theirs. And in matters of ownership, timing matters more than emotion. They had moved my chair. Now they were reaching for my shares. And I was no longer unsure about what that meant. Monday morning, Daniel called again. Not casually this time. His voice was tighter. Mom, can we talk? In person. I'm free Wednesday, I replied. There was a pause. Could we do sooner? I looked out the kitchen window at the bare branches in my backyard. Late fall in Evanston always feels like a season that refuses to rush. I'm not in a hurry, I said. He exhaled slowly. Neither am I. I just want clarity. Clarity. That word again. We agreed to meet that afternoon at his office downtown. Not at the house. Not over brunch. His office. That told me something. When conversations move to corporate spaces, they are no longer emotional. They are structural. Whitmore Capital occupied 2 floors of a modern glass building overlooking the Chicago River. I had been there before, ribbon cutting, holiday open house, polite tours. This time, the receptionist greeted me differently. Mrs. Whitmore, she said with professional warmth. Daniel is expecting you. Expecting. I was escorted past rows of workstations. Young analysts typing quickly, screens glowing with numbers and charts. No one recognized me. And why would they? Visibility is managed. Daniel's office was at the corner. Floor-to-ceiling windows. City skyline stretching wide behind him. He stood when I entered. Mom. I nodded. Daniel. No hugging this time. Just measured space. He closed the door. I've been reviewing the partnership agreement, he began. Of course he had. So have I said. He walked behind his desk and picked up a folder. If you triggered the buyback clause, it would require us to liquidate certain short-term positions. Us. Liquidate. Short-term positions. Not family language. Firm language. I'm aware, I replied calmly. He studied my face. Are you trying to send a message? The question wasn't angry. It was strategic. I don't send messages, I said. I make decisions. Silence filled the office. Outside the glass walls, I could see employees moving briskly between desks. Phones ringing. Deals forming. Inside, it was very quiet. Claire feels, Daniel said carefully, that this is escalating unnecessarily. Escalating. I repeated softly. Yes. Over a seating arrangement. I let that settle. It wasn't the chair, I said. Then what was it? It was the confirmation. His jaw tightened slightly. Confirmation of what? That I am no longer being repositioned gently, I replied. I am being phased. The word hung in the air. Phased. Daniel leaned back against his desk. That's not fair. Fairness isn't what concerns me, I said evenly. Control does. His eyes sharpened. You think we're trying to take control from you? I think you're preparing to. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture I hadn't seen since he was in his 20s. We're trying to protect the firm, he said. And I am protecting my stake in it, I answered. There it was. No raised voices. No accusations. Just alignment of interests. Daniel stepped closer. If you pull your equity, it could signal instability. Only if the structure cannot support itself, I replied. He didn't like that, because he knew it was true. Whitmore Capital had grown quickly. Expansion often relies on confidence. Confidence relies on perception. And perception relies on who appears solid at the foundation. Are you planning to sell externally? He asked quietly. Not today. Relief flickered across his face. But I am reviewing my options. His shoulders dropped slightly. Mom, he said, softer now, you're part of this. Always. Then treat me like I am, I replied. That was the closest I came to confrontation. Not emotional, just factual. He moved to the window, looking out at the river. When Dad passed, he said after a moment, everything shifted. Claire stepped up. She's been thinking long-term. I respect long-term thinking, I said. I taught you to do it. He turned back toward me. What do you want? The question was honest. Not strategic. Just honest. I want acknowledgement, I said. Not applause. Not a speech. Just acknowledgement of position. He was quiet. And if we give you that, he asked carefully. I already have it, I replied. He frowned slightly. In writing. His eyes widened just a fraction. You've already done something. I've reviewed my protections, I said. That's all. That was true. So far. He walked back behind his desk and sat down slowly. This doesn't have to become adversarial. It won't, I said. Unless someone forces it to. Another silence. Then he nodded. Give me time, he said. For what? To recalibrate. Interesting word choice. Recalibrate. That's what you do when an instrument has drifted out of alignment. I stood. I'm not your opposition, Daniel, I said. But I'm not ornamental either. He looked at me differently then. Not as mother. Not as liability. As stakeholder. And sometimes that shift is more important than any apology. When I left his office, I noticed something small. On the wall near the entrance, there was a framed plaque listing original investors. My name was there. Second line. Small font. But present. They hadn't removed it. Not yet. I walked past it without touching the frame. Because recognition forced by leverage is not the same as respect. But it is a beginning. And beginnings, like seating arrangements, tell you exactly where you stand. Now Daniel knew I was standing. And that changed the room. 2 days after my visit to Daniel's office, Claire called. Not text. Not a polite group message. A direct call. Eleanor, she said, her tone composed but firmer than usual. I think we should clear the air. I agree, I replied. She didn't suggest meeting at their house this time. She chose a cafe in downtown Chicago, neutral territory. Public, but quiet. The kind of place where conversations stay measured because walls are thin. When I arrived, she was already seated by the window, laptop closed in front of her, a legal pad beside it. Prepared. I removed my coat slowly and sat across from her. She didn't waste time. Daniel told me you're reviewing your equity. I am. She nodded once. May I ask why? You already know why. Her jaw tightened slightly. I don't believe a seating chart warrants destabilizing a company. It wasn't about the seating chart, I said calmly. She leaned forward. Then help me understand. I studied her for a moment. Claire is intelligent. Strategic. She built her own consulting practice before Daniel's firm grew. She understands image. Positioning. Optics. So I spoke her language. When you place someone away from visibility, I said, you're communicating hierarchy. Her eyes held mine. That event was corporate, she replied. Perception matters. Yes, I agreed. It does. And sometimes, she continued carefully, older family members don't fit the narrative investors expect. There it was. Not cruel. Just clinical. Older family members, I repeated. You're interpreting this emotionally, she said. No, I answered. I'm interpreting it structurally. She folded her hands. We're expanding into new markets, she said. We're positioning Daniel as forward-facing leadership. Youth, agility, growth. And I interfere with that image? She hesitated. You represent legacy, she said finally. And legacy is valuable, but in the right setting. In the right setting. Like a plaque on a wall. Not a seat at the table. I let a small silence pass between us. You asked Daniel to discuss transferring my shares, I said. Her expression didn't change. Yes. For efficiency? For stability? Or for control? That question landed. She inhaled slowly. Control ensures cohesion, she replied. Control ensures silence, I said softly. Her composure slipped, just slightly. We are not trying to silence you. You are trying to consolidate authority. She didn't deny it. Instead, she shifted. If you trigger the buyback clause, she said, you risk harming Daniel's position with the board. Oh, the board. So this was larger than family. You've discussed this with them? I asked. Hypothetically, she said. Hypothetically. I leaned back in my chair. So the board is aware that 12% of equity sits outside executive management. Her lips pressed together. They're aware of the structure. And are they aware I've reviewed my options? Silence. That silence told me enough. Claire broke eye contact first. You're forcing leverage into what should be trust. No, I replied evenly. I'm responding to a shift in respect. She sat straighter. Respect isn't about where you sit at a party. No, I agreed. It's about whether I'm consulted before you plan my transition. Her eyes sharpened. We haven't planned a transition. You've toured facilities, I said calmly. She froze. How did you? You mentioned them months ago. Daniel mentioned them again this week. That was enough. She recovered quickly. We explore options, she said. Responsible families do. Yes, I nodded. And responsible investors do the same. We were no longer speaking as in-laws. We were speaking as stakeholders. Claire glanced at the legal pad beside her. I noticed bullet points. Phrases circled. Buyback timeline. Liquidity exposure. Board perception. This meeting had an agenda. So what do you want? She asked finally. Position, I said. In what sense? Publicly and structurally. She frowned slightly. You already have equity. I also want acknowledgement. She exhaled. That can be arranged. Not cosmetically. Her gaze narrowed. You're asking for influence. I already have it, I replied. You just try to manage it. That landed. For the first time, she looked uncertain. Not afraid. Just recalculating. Daniel built this firm, she said quietly. And I financed its survival, I answered. The cafe hummed softly around us. Espresso machines steaming. Quiet conversations at nearby tables. We sat in stillness. Finally, Claire closed her legal pad. What are you planning? She asked. I haven't decided, I said truthfully. But you're capable of destabilizing us. I'm capable of exercising my rights. Another silence. Then she surprised me. If we expand the advisory board, she said slowly, would you consider taking a formal seat? A formal seat. Interesting choice of words. A seat. Not beside the staff. At the table. With voting authority? I asked. Limited, she said. But visible. Visible. We were back to optics. But this time, visibility would be documented. I stood slowly. Send me the proposal, I said. You won't trigger the buyback before then? She asked. Not before I review it. That was the closest thing to compromise. As I walked out of the cafe, I didn't feel victorious. I felt balanced. They had tried to reduce me to legacy. I had reminded them I was infrastructure. And infrastructure cannot be hidden behind floral arrangements. The seating chart had revealed their strategy. Now they understood mine. This was no longer about humiliation. It was negotiation. And I have never been afraid of negotiation. Claire sent the proposal the next evening. Not through Daniel. Not casually. Directly to my email. Subject line, Advisory Board Expansion, Draft Framework Clinical. Structured. Polished. I waited an hour before opening it. Not because I was afraid of what it contained, but because timing matters. When someone offers you a seat after you've demonstrated leverage, you don't appear eager. You appear steady. I sat at my kitchen table, the same place where every major financial decision in our family had been made, and opened the document. 6 pages. Bullet points. Governance adjustments. Board expansion from 3 to 5 members. Introduction of a founding advisory position. That would be me. Non-executive. Strategic input. Limited voting authority in key structural decisions. Limited. Of course. But visible. I read slowly. They were trying to stabilize perception. If the board knew I had reviewed my options, they needed to show alignment. Public alignment. Not sentimental alignment. Corporate alignment. My phone buzzed. Daniel. Did you see it? He asked without greeting. I did. What do you think? I think it's thoughtful. He exhaled. Relief, just barely contained. It's a good compromise. Compromise. Interesting word. You understand, he continued, that this protects everyone. Yes, I said. It protects liquidity. Silence. Mom, I'm not criticizing, I replied calmly. I'm acknowledging structure. He lowered his voice. The board was concerned. I assumed they would be. They don't like uncertainty. Neither do I. There was a pause long enough to feel honest. Are you still considering triggering the clause? He asked. I looked at the document again. Page 4 outline communication strategy. Internal memo. Press phrasing. Whitmore Capital proudly welcomes founding investor Eleanor Whitmore to its expanded advisory board. Proudly welcomes. As if I had just appeared. I am considering alignment, I said finally. That's not an answer. It's the only one you need right now. He didn't argue. Because he knew. The power dynamic had shifted. Not dramatically. Not explosively. But measurably. After we hung up, I called Thomas. I've received a proposal, I told him. He reviewed it within the hour. It's strategically sound, he said. They're trying to neutralize risk. Am I surrendering leverage if I accept? Not entirely, he replied. You retain your equity, but you reduce perceived hostility. Perceived hostility. I smiled slightly. I had never raised my voice. Never made a public threat. And yet my silence had been interpreted as pressure. Good. Negotiate voting scope, Thomas added. Request clarity on buyback triggers. and ensure your position cannot be removed without supermajority approval. Protection layered inside recognition. I appreciated that. The next afternoon, I drove downtown again. Not to Daniel's office. To the building across the street. A smaller conference space they often rented for private board meetings. Claire was there. 2 board members. Daniel. They stood when I entered. This time, I was not escorted past workstations. I was invited directly into the room. There is a difference. Claire spoke first. We're glad you're here. I took my seat. At the table. Not near a service cart. Not beside staff. At the table. We value your role in the firm's foundation, one board member said smoothly. I nodded. And we believe formalizing that role strengthens our narrative moving forward. Narrative. Always narrative. I placed my copy of the proposal on the table. I have 3 adjustments, I said calmly. Daniel's eyes flickered, surprised, but not shocked. First, I continued, voting authority in matters involving structural equity shifts. Claire's pen paused. Second, removal protection requiring a supermajority. One board member exchanged a glance with the other. And third, I finished, public acknowledgement of founding capital contributions in the internal announcement. Not emotional, not accusatory, just accurate. The room was quiet. One of the board members cleared his throat. These are significant additions. So was my investment, I replied. No one challenged that. Daniel leaned forward. We can work with this, he said carefully. Claire studied me for a long moment. Then she nodded. We'll revise. It wasn't defeat. It wasn't victory. It was equilibrium. By the end of the meeting, nothing was signed. But something was understood. I would not be transitioned quietly. If they wanted my alignment, it would be documented. As I left the building, I passed the rooftop venue across the river where the promotion party had been held. From the outside, it looked smaller, less grand. Funny how perspective changes scale. That night at the party, I had been seated with the staff. Today, I had negotiated structural authority. Not because I demanded it loudly, but because I refused to shrink silently. The difference between humiliation and leverage is time. You can react immediately and lose position. Or you can wait, assess, and move when structure depends on you. They had tried to manage visibility. Now, they were adjusting governance. And all because of a chair. Sometimes the smallest placement reveals the largest intentions. And once you see intention clearly, you never sit the same way again. The revised proposal arrived the following Friday. This time, it wasn't just a draft. It included track changes. My 3 conditions were addressed, carefully worded, legally precise. Voting authority and structural equity shifts, approved, though narrowly defined. Removal protection, supermajority required. Public acknowledgement of founding capital, added to the internal announcement and investor summary. Not sentimental language. Not supportive mother. Founding investor. Accurate. Daniel called an hour after it was delivered. We incorporated your revisions, he said. The board agreed. All of them? I asked. Yes. That told me something important. They hadn't just accommodated me. They needed me aligned. Have you reconsidered the buyback? He asked. I've reconsidered timing, I replied. Silence. Not tension. Calculation. He understood what that meant. If I signed the advisory agreement, I wouldn't trigger the clause immediately. But the clause would remain intact. Leverage doesn't disappear. It matures. The signing meeting was scheduled for Tuesday morning. Same smaller conference room. Same board members. But the atmosphere was different. Less defensive. More formal. When I entered, there was a printed nameplate in front of one chair. Eleanor Whitmore, Founding Advisory Board Small Detail. Large signal. I took my seat without comment. The documents were passed around. Each page flagged. Each signature line marked. Claire spoke briefly about strategic continuity. One board member emphasized intergenerational strength. Intergenerational. Interesting how language shifts when equity becomes visible. When it was convenient, I was legacy. When it was risky, I became structure. I signed last. Not dramatically, just deliberately. The pen moved smoothly across the paper. With that signature, I secured visibility. But more importantly, I secured documentation. After the meeting, one of the board members approached me privately. I hope you understand, he said quietly. None of this was personal. I never assumed it was, I replied. Because it wasn't personal. It was strategic. And strategy doesn't feel. It positions. That afternoon, Whitmore Capital sent an internal memo. Whitmore Capital proudly welcomes founding investor Eleanor Whitmore to its expanded advisory board, reinforcing the firm's commitment to structural strength and long-term stewardship. Stewardship. A better word. My phone buzzed steadily for the next few hours. Emails from mid-level managers congratulating me. A message from an analyst who wrote, "It's inspiring to see long-term vision recognized. Recognition shifts behavior quickly. Visibility, once documented, alters perception." Daniel called that evening. "I'm glad we resolved this," he said. "Resolved?" I asked gently. "Aligned," he corrected. "Better." Claire didn't call. Instead, she sent a brief email. "Thank you for your willingness to formalize your role. This strengthens our narrative." Our narrative. I read that sentence twice. Strengthens. Not softens. Not hides. Strengthens. That was progress. But I wasn't naive. Board seats can be symbolic. Voting authority can be limited in practice. And influence depends on participation. So I attended my first advisory session the following week. Conference table. Financial projections displayed on screens. Expansion into 2 new regional markets under discussion. I listened more than I spoke. When I did speak, it wasn't about image. It was about liquidity buffers. About debt exposure. About overextension. One analyst adjusted his numbers after my comment. Another board member asked me to elaborate. Daniel watched quietly. He was seeing something different now. Not mother. Not obstacle. Not legacy. Investor. After the meeting, Claire lingered behind. "You handled that well," she said. "I've handled markets before," I replied. She nodded slowly. "I underestimated how closely you were watching." I met her gaze. "I underestimated how quickly you were repositioning." We stood there in silence for a moment. Not enemies. Not allies. Stakeholders. "Is this enough?" she asked quietly. "For now," I said. "Because leverage isn't about destruction. It's about balance. And balance requires monitoring." Over the next month, something subtle changed. My name appeared on presentation slides under governance structure. Board members consulted me before major announcements. Daniel began asking my opinion before finalizing expansion decisions. Not always, but often enough to signal shift. And interestingly, no one mentioned assisted living again. Not once. The brochures disappeared from casual conversation. Future transitions were no longer framed as relocation. They were framed as legacy planning, with me included. Inclusion looks different when it's documented. One evening, Lily asked if I could attend her piano recital. Claire didn't hesitate. "Of course," she said. No redirection. No hesitation. Just inclusion. It wasn't about winning. It was about recalibration. They had tested my placement. I had reviewed my structure. Now the system adjusted. The buyback clause remains in my agreement. Untouched. Untriggered. But understood. And that understanding is what changed everything. Because sometimes the most powerful move isn't pulling your equity. It's reminding everyone you can. That night at the promotion party, I was seated with the staff. Today, I sit at the advisory table. Not because they suddenly valued sentiment, but because I valued position. And when you protect your position calmly, people reconsider how they place you. Chairs move. Structures endure. And I intend to endure. 3 weeks after the advisory announcement, Whitmore Capital hosted another event. Smaller than the promotion party. More targeted. An investor strategy dinner at a private club along the Chicago River. This time, my invitation arrived by courier. Printed. Formal. Eleanor Whitmore, Advisory Board, not Mrs., not an afterthought. A title. I took my time choosing what to wear. Not navy silk. Not understated background. A tailored charcoal suit. Structured shoulders. Clean lines. When I entered the private dining room, I noticed something immediately. The seating chart was displayed near the entrance. Alphabetical by last name. Not hierarchical. Not curated by optics. Alphabetical. Whitmore appeared near the bottom, but not near the service door. At the main table. Second seat from the head. Across from Daniel. Beside one of the senior board members. I paused only briefly before taking my place. No hostess redirecting. No tight smile. No confusion. Just acknowledgement. Daniel approached first. "You look sharp," he said. "Structure suits me," I replied. He gave a small nod. Claire arrived moments later, elegant as always. She glanced at the seating chart, then at me. A flicker of recognition passed between us. Not tension. Awareness. The dinner unfolded smoothly. Discussions about market volatility, interest rates, expansion timelines. Nothing dramatic. But placement changes perception. When I spoke about maintaining liquidity reserves during rapid growth, people listened. Not indulgently, not politely, attentively. One investor asked, "What's your outlook on Q3 exposure?" My outlook. Not Daniel's. Not Claire's. Mine. I answered calmly, referencing past downturns I had navigated with my late husband's business decades ago. Experience has weight when it's allowed into the room. Midway through dinner, I noticed something small. A staff member approached to refill water glasses. He hesitated briefly when he reached me, perhaps remembering the promotion party. Then he addressed me properly. "Ms. Whitmore." Not "ma'am." Not confusion. Recognition. I nodded. After dessert, Daniel stood to give a brief closing statement. "I'd like to thank our advisory board for guiding our long-term strategy," he said. His eyes met mine directly, "for reminding us that growth without foundation is fragile." The room applauded lightly. It wasn't emotional. It wasn't dramatic. But it was deliberate. And deliberate matters. Later that evening, as the event wound down, Claire stepped beside me near the window overlooking the river. "The optics tonight were important," she said quietly. "Yes," I agreed. "We're being watched." "So am I," I replied. She studied my reflection in the glass. "You've been more involved than I anticipated," she said. "I've always been involved," I answered. I was simply seated differently. She exhaled, not in frustration, but in acknowledgement. "You didn't overreact," she said after a moment. "No," I replied. "I recalibrated." She nodded slowly. "I miscalculated that night." It wasn't an apology, but it was close enough. "You prioritized visibility," I said. "I prioritized ownership." She looked at me directly then. "And now?" "Now we align them." The evening ended without incident. No raised voices. No dramatic confrontations. Just a quiet redistribution of position. When I returned home, I placed the event program on my kitchen counter. Under governance structure, my name appeared alongside the others. Not smaller font. Not secondary placement. Equal line spacing. I poured myself a cup of tea and sat down. The memory of the rooftop promotion party surfaced briefly. The smaller centerpiece. The dessert cart. The phrase "prioritize certain guests." It felt distant now. Not erased, but contextualized. That night had been a test. Not just of respect, but of response. If I had reacted emotionally, they would have framed it as fragility. If I had ignored it, they would have continued repositioning. Instead, I reviewed structure. And structure reshaped behavior. My phone buzzed. A message from Daniel. Tonight felt right. I considered that for a moment before replying. Position feels different when it's intentional. He responded almost immediately. "It won't happen again." I didn't ask him to clarify. I didn't need to. Because what he meant wasn't just about seating. It was about assumption. Assuming I would shrink. Assuming I wouldn't notice. Assuming equity could be softened into symbolism. Those assumptions were gone now. The buyback clause still sits in my agreement. Quiet. Untouched. But powerful. And sometimes the strongest protection isn't execution. It's presence. At 70 years old, I've learned something simple. People will test where you belong. Not always cruelly. Not always consciously. But they will test it. And when they do, you have two choices. Accept the chair they assign you. Or review the structure that placed it there. I chose the second. And tonight, I wasn't seated with the staff. I was seated exactly where my ownership positioned me. Not louder. Not angrier. Just properly aligned. And alignment, once restored, changes every room you enter. About a month after the investor dinner, something unexpected happened. Not dramatic. Not explosive. Just quiet. Daniel asked for my opinion before making a decision, and he followed it. It was about a potential acquisition. A smaller boutique firm in Milwaukee. Strong branding. Aggressive expansion model. High debt ratio. The executive team was excited. Fast growth. One board member said during the advisory call. "This positions us ahead of competitors." Daniel presented projections confidently. Claire supported the narrative, integration strategy, marketing alignment, public messaging. When it was my turn to speak, I didn't rush. "I've seen this model before," I said calmly. Rapid expansion financed by optimism. No one interrupted. "The numbers look promising," I continued. "But the debt structure is fragile. If interest rates adjust even slightly, liquidity tightens." One of the analysts shifted in his seat. Daniel leaned forward. "You're suggesting we wait?" "I'm suggesting you renegotiate terms," I replied. "Reduce exposure." increase reserves, or walk away. Silence. Not dismissive. Evaluative. In the past, that kind of caution might have been framed as conservative thinking, legacy hesitation. But now, it was advisory input. 2 days later, Daniel called. We pulled back, he said. Completely. I asked. We renegotiated. Lowered the upfront commitment. Structured it differently. That's wise. He paused. You were right about the exposure. It wasn't grand. It wasn't emotional. But it was acknowledgement. That shift, from managing my visibility to relying on my judgment, mattered more than any seating chart. A week later, I attended another board session. Different tone this time. Less defensive energy. More consultation. When financial models were displayed on screen, I was looped into the discussion early, not at the end. Claire even turned toward me mid-presentation. Eleanor, would you stress test this scenario with your liquidity lens? My liquidity lens. Interesting phrase. I did. And they listened. After the meeting, as the room emptied, Daniel remained seated. Mom, he said quietly. I didn't realize how much I'd separated business from family. I didn't answer immediately. Separation is natural and growth. But erasure isn't. You were building something, I said finally. You thought you needed to simplify the narrative. He nodded slowly. I thought investors preferred clean stories. They prefer stable ones, I replied. He absorbed that. Outside the conference room, Claire was speaking with one of the board members. When she rejoined us, her expression was different. Less strategic. More measured. We've updated the governance summary for the next quarterly report, she said. Your advisory role will be highlighted under capital stewardship. Capital stewardship. Better. Not decorative. Not honorary. Stewardship implies responsibility. I looked at her. You understand why this mattered, I said. She met my gaze. Yes. It wasn't apology. It was recognition. And sometimes recognition is enough. Over the following weeks, small adjustments continued. I received draft communications before they were finalized. I was consulted on dividend timing. When the firm hosted a regional leadership lunch, my seat was at the center table, not because of optics, but because I was part of governance. No one made a show of it. No one referenced the promotion party. But the room behaved differently. And rooms don't change unless structure changes. One afternoon, Lily came over after school. She sat at my kitchen table, legs swinging beneath the chair, telling me about her science project. Mom says you're on Daddy's board now, she said casually. I am, I smiled. Does that mean you're his boss? I laughed softly. No, sweetheart. It means we work together. She considered that. Like a team? Yes, I said. Like a team. That word felt different now. Team. Not hierarchy. Not management. Alignment. Later that evening, I found myself thinking back to the rooftop venue. The dessert cart. The staff wristband. The smaller centerpiece. If that night hadn't happened, would this shift have occurred? Probably not. Because comfort allows assumptions to grow quietly. Discomfort forces review. They tested my placement. I tested their structure. Now the balance was visible. The buyback clause remains untouched. Not as a threat. As insurance. And insurance changes behavior even when it's never used. Daniel called again at the end of the quarter. Board vote passed unanimously, he said. Expansion plan approved, with your modifications. Good, I replied. And Mom? Yes. I'm glad you didn't leave that night. I understood what he meant. If I had walked out of the promotion party early, if I had reacted publicly, if I had withdrawn emotionally, we might never have reached this equilibrium. I didn't leave, I said calmly, because I needed to see the room clearly. He was quiet for a moment. Thank you, he said. When we hung up, I sat back in my chair. The house was quiet, peaceful, not because conflict never occurred, but because structure had been clarified. Respect restored, not through shouting, not through shame, through documentation, through leverage, through patience. That's the difference between reacting to humiliation and responding to repositioning. One shrinks you, the other sharpens you. And I have never been afraid of sharpening. A year later, Whitmore Capital hosted its annual leadership gala. Not on a rooftop this time. In a ballroom overlooking Lake Michigan. Large windows. Winter lights reflecting off the water. Tables arranged in deliberate symmetry. When the invitation arrived, I noticed something subtle. No assigned seating chart attached. Just seating to follow. I smiled when I read it. Because this time, I wasn't waiting to see where I would be placed. I already knew. The night of the gala, I arrived early. not to make an entrance, but to observe. The staff moved efficiently, adjusting centerpieces, testing microphones. The event coordinator greeted me with recognition. "Ms. Whitmore, your table is prepared." No hesitation. No confusion. She led me toward the center of the room. Table 1. Not at the head, but beside it. Balanced. Intentional. I ran my fingers lightly along the back of the chair before sitting down. It wasn't about prestige. It was about alignment. Daniel arrived shortly after, confident but steadier now. Not performing success, inhabiting it. Claire followed, composed as ever. She caught my eye across the room and gave a small nod. Not rehearsed. Not strategic. Just acknowledgement. As the room filled, I noticed something else. On the large screen behind the stage, a short video played, a recap of the firm's journey. There were images of the early office, folding tables, handwritten whiteboards, grainy photos from the first year, and there, briefly, was a scanned image of the original investment document. My signature visible at the bottom. Not highlighted, not dramatized, simply included. Foundation. When Daniel took the stage later that evening, he didn't speak long. He thanked the team, the partners, the clients. Then he paused. "And to those who built the base before the spotlight ever found us," he said, his voice steady. "Thank you for teaching us that growth without structure is temporary." His eyes met mine. The applause that followed was polite, professional, but it wasn't for optics. It was for continuity. I didn't stand. I didn't wave. I simply nodded. After dinner, as music filled the room and conversations softened into something less formal, Lily came running toward me in a navy dress that almost matched the one I had worn the year before. "Grandma," she said, breathless, "Mom said you used to help Daddy when he didn't have an office." "I did," I smiled. "Were you his boss then?" I laughed softly. "No, I was his support." She thought about that. "Are you still?" "Yes," I said. "But now he knows it." She seemed satisfied with that answer and ran back toward the dance floor. Claire approached a few minutes later. "The board voted unanimously to extend your advisory term indefinitely," she said quietly. "Indefinitely." "I read the update," I replied. She hesitated. "I was wrong about one thing," she said. I waited. "I thought visibility was something you controlled by limiting exposure." "And now?" I asked. "Now I understand it's something you earn by protecting structure." It wasn't dramatic, but it was honest. And honesty, in corporate rooms and family rooms alike, is rare currency. "I never wanted control," I said calmly. "I wanted acknowledgement." She nodded. "You have it." Later that night, as I prepared to leave, Daniel walked me to the entrance. No rush. No distracted glances over his shoulder. "Mom," he said, "I've been thinking about that night. The promotion party." "So have I," I replied. "I thought I was protecting the image," he said. "I didn't realize I was testing the foundation." I looked at him carefully. "Foundations don't shout," I said. "They hold." He swallowed, just slightly. "I won't forget that again." Outside, the cold air felt familiar. Chicago wind has a way of reminding you that stability matters more than height. As I waited for my car, I allowed myself to revisit that first night. The dessert cart, the staff wristband, the smaller centerpiece. I had thought, in that moment, that I was being diminished. But I wasn't. I was being revealed. Revealed to myself. Because humiliation only reduces you if you accept the version of yourself someone else assigns. That night, they moved my chair. And I chose not to argue about the chair. I reviewed the structure. I protected my ownership. I secured my position. Not loudly, not publicly, but firmly. And that changed everything. Today, when I walk into a room, corporate or family, I no longer wonder where I will be seated. I know where I stand. Not because they decided, but because I did. A year ago, at my son's promotion party, I was seated with the staff. Tonight, I was seated at the table that my equity built. But the real shift wasn't the chair. It was the clarity. Clarity about value. Clarity about leverage. Clarity about respect. And here is what I've learned at 70. People may rearrange the room. They may test your visibility. They may assume you will shrink to preserve comfort. But if you understand your